I'm Martha Malinski, for those that joined us in the last few minutes, Executive Director with the Association of Colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And I am delighted to introduce you to Dr. Ann McElaney-Johnson, one of our ACSSJ member president, campus presidents, for a talk on the gift of the charism. Dr. Ann McElaney-Johnson is president of Mount St. Mary's University, the only women's university in Los Angeles and one of the most diverse in the nation. Since her appointment in 2011, she has led and implemented a strategic vision for the university that fosters a culture of innovation and excellence, preparing students to be global leaders and pursue purpose-filled lives. Her vision is rooted in the traditions and heritage of the university's founding Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, as well as the university's institutional mission. It may be an understatement to say that Dr. Ann McElaney-Johnson has a deep commitment to the charism. Just a few examples of these include: in 2016, she created the CSJ Institute to uphold and advance the mission of the founders. She leads annual pilgrimages of faculty, staff, and board members and others to Le Puy, France, where the Sisters of St. Joseph were founded in 1650, 375 years ago. She teaches a class to first-year students on the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And a few years ago, Mount St. Mary's University bought the family home of Mother St. John Fontbonne. And these are just a few of the examples. The list is long, but what you also need to know is that Dr. Ann McElaney-Johnson embodies and lives the charism each and every day through her relationships with others, her mindfulness to meeting the needs of the time, and the deepest care for the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Before I turn it over to Ann for her presentation, I will share with you that following her presentation, we will have 10 to 15 minutes for questions from attendees that I will moderate. If you could put your questions into the chat, and either as they come up or at the end of the presentation, and I will share those for conversation later. Now, I'm delighted to introduce to you Dr. Ann McElaney-Johnson today to share her thoughts on the gift of the charism.
Great. Thank you so much, Martha, for your very generous introduction, and also for bringing us together in this national gathering. I appreciate that. I also want to thank our friends and colleagues from Avila for hosting us, and I really want to thank Sister Carol, of whom I am an enormous fan, for her beautiful opening prayer. So it is so good to be here with you all. So over these days that we have together, the 2 days we have time together, we have this wonderful opportunity to explore the richness of the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. And what a blessing it is to be in company with so many sisters who are here with us for this time together. Now, we probably all come to this national conference with some sense of what the charism means and how it impacts us personally and professionally. And I imagine that if we were to ask everyone here to write down just what that charism is, we would see some common language. I'm betting we would see the terms caring for the dear neighbor, serving all persons without distinction, responding to the needs of the time, popping up pretty frequently, as they should, for these are manifestations of the charism at work. And I imagine that some among us would call out the essence of the charism of our sisters as unifying love. And some of us might hold up the consensus statement written 375 years ago by Father Jean-Pierre Médaille to help us understand what that means. And here we have, just to remind us all, stimulated by the Holy Spirit of God and receptive to the inspiration, we move always toward profound love of God and love of neighbor without distinction, from whom we do not separate ourselves. And this goes on. And you can see in this statement that love is the centerpiece of the statement, a love that unifies in the Spirit. And then this love that unifies in the Spirit is the gift and drives the work of the sisters. Now, and we can stop this, thank you. Now, some of us might be feeling pretty comfortable right now, for this is all familiar to us. But others could have seen that statement for the first time. For among us, there are varying levels of background and knowledge of the sisters, their history, their spiritual practices, and their ministries. Some of us here are fluent in all things CSJ, especially our sisters who are here with us. Others of us would claim some proficiency, and there are some among us who are just beginning this exploration and may feel a bit more tentative. So whether you are walking into this CSJ world for the first time, simply catching up on some language, seeing these 2 days as a way to deepen your understanding and experience the charism, or taking these hours as a mini retreat, a time to breathe amidst the busyness of the end of the semester, we all have something in common here. As Sister Carol said, there is a thread that connects us, and that is the charism of the CSJs that is offered to all of us. We have all been invited into this place of love. And as many know, the word charism comes from the Greek word charis and is a spiritual gift given by the Holy Spirit to the followers of Jesus. All religious orders have a charism that is their driving force, their mission, if you will, that informs the way they live out their life and their faith. For the Sisters of St. Joseph, that driving spirit is unifying love, love that brings people together. Like today in this gathering, where we have over 300 registered participants for the next 2 days, in the busiest time of the semester, love has brought us together. The charism has brought each of us to these Zoom spaces. This gift given to the Sisters of St. Joseph 375 years ago, a gift they have shared with millions of people. This gift is there for each of us. Now, I want to begin this morning with my own story of coming into this charism. It may surprise you a bit, but I hope it will give you a sense of the generosity and the power of this gift that is so freely given by the Sisters of St. Joseph with their lay partners, even when we enter into this as true beginners, as I was. 14 years ago, I became president of Mount St. Mary's University. Having been formed as an undergraduate by the Jesuits, I had experienced the power of Catholic higher ed, but had spent my graduate years and my first 23 years of higher education experience at public and private universities that were not affiliated with any particular faith tradition in a formal way. I'm going to be honest with you. I had no idea what a charism was. And though I could have told you the mission of the Jesuits, I had no language around which that came from. I had little to no familiarity with the Sisters of St. Joseph. And coming from the East Coast, I had no knowledge of Mount St. Mary's until a friend told me about this opportunity. Although I imagine I referenced the CSJs in my cover letter of application from doing research on the webpage, I really had no clear idea what that all meant. I wanted to come to Mount St. Mary's because of the mission of the university and because of the students it served. But when I came for my on-campus interview, I had my first experience with what I later understood to be the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Over my 2.5 days visiting the university, I met many people, and much of it is a blur 14 years later. But I still clearly remember my interactions with the sisters. I was struck by their attentiveness, their kindness, their penetrating questions, always framed in encouragement rather than challenge. But what I most noticed was their treatment of my husband, who had accompanied me on the interview. Now, my husband did not have the opportunity to go to college, and university campuses can go out of their way to make people without college degrees feel out of place. So you can imagine I was watching for that. If I was hired and ready to move across the country from North Carolina, my husband had to feel at home as well. Now, I have to say that the whole Mount community was lovely to both of us. But the sisters, they must have sensed something, because they welcomed my husband with such love, with such a warm and generous spirit. And without having any of the CSJ language at that time, that was my first experience with the charism. My second and kind of strange experience I want to share with you was at my first meeting of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, ACCU, which is represented here today. It was February of my first year of presidency. I attended the New President's Institute, And at the first panel, experienced presidents who were speaking to us kept talking about this thing called charism. I had never heard this word. I remember looking around the room and everyone seemed to be nodding in understanding as all the new presidents took copious notes. It was one of those moments when you feel like not only are you not in the club, you weren't even aware that there was a club that you were being left out of. Everyone here was following the words of these esteemed presidents, and I wasn't even sure how to spell the word. So I did what we all used to do before ChatGPT. I Googled the term right there in the middle of the session to find out what we were talking about. Seeing what that word meant on Google was like a thunderbolt to me. This thing that I was experiencing every time I was with the CSJs, this feeling of being invited in and welcomed into something important, something beautiful, it had a name, Charism. And behind that name, there was a thing, a spirit that was uniquely CSJ. And it was that spirit that made me feel so immediately and so continually at home at the Mount. As that moment provided full clarity, you might think that over the course of that conference, I finally figured it all out. But the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph is so much more beautiful than that. For it is a continual unfolding, a continual revealing of the power of unifying love. To this day, new revelations and experience of the charism surprise and delight me at the most unexpected moments. But what has been most life-changing is the absolute openness of the Sisters of St. Joseph, their expansive generosity in their sharing and their entrusting of this charism with us. Now, lest anyone in the Zoom room worry, particularly my colleagues from Mount St. Mary's University who entrust me with my leadership role, I will share with you that our sisters at Mount St. Mary's have told me that they saw the charism in me when I applied, but long before I knew what it even meant. They knew that I was a bit naive, perhaps, partially formed, an eager candidate for the presidency, but they saw something in me. They saw it growing in me when I started digging for knowledge and understanding. They saw it maturing in me when I went on my first pilgrimage to Le Puy, and they continued to encourage me as I continued to marvel at the gift, this gift that is open to all of us, and as I continue to ponder our responsibility for it. Now, there's been much that has been written on gifts and what they mean. In 1925, the seminal work of French anthropologist Marcel Mauss on the theory of the gift explored how gift giving creates and maintains social relationships. His theory posits that gifts are never free. He asserts that gifts come with obligations to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. I remember first engaging in gift theory as a graduate student in the study of social relationships in 17th century French literature. And while I acknowledge that many gifts come with obligations and expectations, and we have all received these kinds of gifts, it sometimes feels like there is actually a price tag attached to them. As a young Ph.D. student, I resisted the universality of such a concept. I maintained that some gifts were just free. My thinking, however, has evolved. Observing the Sisters of St. Joseph and studying in more depth the very concept of charism, I do believe that by its nature, it should be freely given. And I think each of us has the freedom to embrace it or not. But once embraced, the theory of the gift carries. There is an obligation, an expectation. For the charism is not something to be held. It is not something to be possessed. It must be given to others in return. And that, my friends, is where we come in. The CSJs generously pass this charism of unifying love to each of us. But this gift asks something of us as well, as individuals and as universities and colleges. We are poised as institutions of higher education to do something quite remarkable. We are positioned to spread this charism in a world that desperately needs to be brought together through love. But this does not happen by chance. Life is busy. Our calendars are too full, and yet the threats to a caring society, to social justice, and to the care of this planet are too real to hope that this will happen by chance. It will happen just because we speak the language of charism. We have to build this into the very structure of our institutions. We have to be thoughtful, intentional, and thorough in this work. Let me just spend a few minutes sharing some of the ways we at the Mount seek to lean into and live out the charism of our sisters to spur our collective thinking as we move into these hours together. First, I have to acknowledge the incredible work of Shannon Green, our Senior Director of the CSJ Institute. 9.5 years ago, Shannon came to Mount St. Mary's to bring to life this vision we created for our then newly opened CSJ Institute. The vision statement we created as a collective was bold and aspirational. Rooted in the rich history of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, the CSJ Institute advances the CSJ commitment to serve all persons without distinction, to respond to the needs of the time, and to prepare fearless visionaries for a just future. This vision has guided our work, and under Shannon's leadership, we set about establishing programs, conducting research, and creating resources to deepen our experience of the charism. Perhaps the most important resource has been our oral history project, a collaboration among the Institute, our film department, and the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, LA Province. Through over 50 interviews with Sisters of St. Joseph, some of whom have since passed, we have captured the experiences and lives of these visionaries whose stories and words of wisdom continue to impact our students and all of us. Films on their experience of the charism, their experience of Vatican II, their history, their calling and lived vocation, their advice on living a life of purpose, and what love demands of us. It is all there on film for generations of students who come to the Mount. It is there for you too. We have also made the spirit of the Sisters of St. Joseph, their history, charism, legacy, a part of our core curriculum, naming our program Liberal Arts Core Education, better known as LACE. I'm lucky enough, as Martha mentioned, to co-teach a first-year seminar on leadership through the example of our sisters. And I am amazed how the oral history project videos impact our students. For those who have never met a sister in person, these videos bring to life the sisters' personal experiences, their personalities, their love, and they touch our students in surprising and unexpected ways. We're going to give you just a taste of one short video called Good Advice to get a sense of what this is all about.
I would say gratitude and attitude.
There are no mistakes.
Don't suffer the small stuff.
If we don't make mistakes, we don't learn.
Just hang in there.
When you make a mistake, we can all learn.
Be a good listener.
Enjoy all your preparation.
Try something out.
Everything that you think you can do it. Because then it makes you realize that you can do a lot more than what you were doing.
Keep active. Active as long as you can keep active.
It has to be like brushing your teeth. You would never think of not brushing your teeth, right? You should have the same thing about exercise.
The most important thing is how you make the people feel about themselves.
It's not the work, it's how I am at the work, and it's how I treat the people.
There are days that are quiet and peaceful and flowing, and there are days when there's chaos and upset, but that's life. That's life. That's all the way it is. Go with the flow. Because if you fight against that, you just make yourself miserable.
I have these two voices. One that keeps resisting, I want to go back to the comfort zone. And the other one that keeps pushing me and saying, do something new, adventure. You know, don't stay with the old. The world is changing, and we can't stay with our old stuff. Like the yesterday thoughts, I get up in the morning and I have the thoughts that I had yesterday and the day before. The world needs new things, right?
There is a sister who was at Crondelet Center when I was a young sister. Her name was Sister Petronella. She was so welcoming. I said to her one day, Sister, you know, when I'm older, I really want to be like you. Can you give me some advice? And she said, well, my experience is when I've gotten older, I'm just a lot more like I was when I was younger. So if you want to be a certain way when you're older, you better start now.
That gives you just a sample, a taste of the kinds of wisdom and information passed on in these videos that you can imagine are so compelling to our students. And the other piece I want to highlight is the establishment that Martha referenced of our yearly pilgrimage to France to trace the footsteps of our sisters. Now, people have asked me why we do this, and the answer is very easy. In 2015, I signed up for a pilgrimage to go to Le Puy, and in the company of two sisters from St. Louis, I embarked on an experience that changed my life, literally changed my life. It was in the streets of Le Puy, in front of Mother St. John Fontbonne's family home, in the Heritage Room in Lyon, that the charism came to life in the most vibrant and meaningful way for me. I decided then and there we needed to provide this experience for our faculty and staff and our students so that we could enter more fully into this charism, so we could think more creatively about how to live it, how to share it, how to spread it. So 1 year later, we established our pilgrimage, which has been a continually illuminating experience for our Mount community. Year over year, we discover pieces of the history unknown to us before. And a highlight of our time in France, as Martha mentioned, was the purchase of the birthplace of Mother St. John Fontbonne in the beautiful.
Never knew what that meant.
We have the other video going, I think.
We didn't even know anything about our founder.
There, thank you. That's a hint of the charism video that's on the oral history series as well. But this home you just saw a brief picture of, this home provides a space for pilgrims from Mount St. Mary's, but from all over the world, to experience ever more deeply the life and love of Mother St. John and the Sisters of St. Joseph. And it serves as a house of study for faculty conducting research that brings them to France. Participating in these pilgrimages has deepened our individual understanding of the charism and our collective resolve to bring the spirit to our university and to the experience of every faculty, staff, and student of Mount St. Mary's. So you can see at Mount St. Mary's, we are incorporating the stories, the work, and the impact of our sisters in ways big and small. These are just a few examples of how we're trying to do this work. We are still on a journey, but every step we take on this path opens new opportunities, widens our lens, and deepens our understanding. At our graduation yesterday, how moved we were to hear our student speakers at both our undergraduate and graduate commencement reference the Sisters of St. Joseph in their remarks to their peers. Unscripted, they spoke of the mission and the spirit of the sisters and how it has offered them new ways of living and new models of leadership. Now, over the next 2 days together, we will share ideas and practices that will help all of our campuses become places where every student, every faculty and staff member will feel touched by the power of unifying love. And we will, I hope, dream together about how that looks in the face of executive orders that ask us to undo or turn our backs on the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all that Catholic social teaching and the Sisters of St. Joseph ask of us. There's one more lesson I would like to share with you on what the charism has taught me in the past years. In the fall of 2019, just months before the reality of COVID hit our world and our campuses, we at Mount St. Mary's experienced a fire here in Los Angeles that threatened our university. The fire came up quickly in the middle of the night and surrounded our campus and the mother house of the Sisters of St. Joseph at the foot of our campus. Evacuation efforts were hampered by the flames that engulfed the periphery of the campus and the home of the Sisters of St. Joseph. Our sisters sheltered in place, protected by firefighters who literally surrounded the building, while our students who were more mobile left amidst the flames that surrounded them and safely reached the welcoming arms of our staff. at our downtown campus. We spent the night and into the early morning praying that our sisters would be safe and our campus would be spared. Both prayers were answered. In the days after the fire, we turned our attention to relocating classes to our downtown campus, finding housing for all of our residential students in a neighboring hotel, providing evacuated students clothing and personal items to replace those that were left back in their rooms, which were inaccessible for several weeks. And then 2 months after we reopened our campus, COVID hit. And like everyone across the country and everyone on this screen, we closed our campuses and asked our community to move online for classes, meetings, our entire operations. People have asked me, as they've probably asked you, how do you lead in such times of stress, loss, struggle, and uncertainty? Now, for us, those lucky enough to be part of this association of the colleges of the Sisters of St. Joseph, the answer is clear. We look to the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and all the wisdom we need is there. Love. In those days of fire and COVID, love became our leadership strategy. Love was the animating force of our faculty as they pivoted to new modes of teaching and worked tirelessly to get every student over the finish line that semester. When students complained and put a change.org petition demanding that we offer in-person graduation, we didn't respond with the tired frustration that we might have felt. We loved them through it. When students debated whether or not to return to a virtual fall semester in 2020, a fleet of faculty and staff contacted every hesitant student and helped them make a plan to keep going. When we worried about how to financially make it all work, we used our most creative thinking to put the welfare of people, our students, faculty, and staff, as our only priority. The Charism was a gift for it provided a clarity of thinking in those challenging times, just as it does today. The answers to the questions posed in the most difficult of moments are not always difficult to discern if we lead with love. What I have learned is that this charism, this gift, is not a nice addition to our work or a lovely way to pull us all together or just great language. It is a relentless commitment to caring for each person in our communities, no matter what. It doesn't mean that we don't make hard choices and hard decisions that can be painful for ourselves and our communities, but it does mean that we do this work with heart. I am convinced that our minds are only powerful instruments when informed by love. The charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph is powerful. And as we are invited into this the beauty of this gift, it asks each of us and our institutions to be brave, thoughtful, fierce, gentle, kind, and relentless as we continue to pass this gift on to others. For the Sisters of St. Joseph have been clear. Our work is not done until all are one. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Wow. It's great to hear your words and reflections. I'll invite members of the conference to drop your questions into the chat so that we can see them. And, you know, I sort of want to take a moment to soak it all in. But, you know, I really loved how you started by, you know, how you enter a space, how you entered your search and position at Mount St. Mary's, and how your husband entered was really done so with love, and that led the way. And I think about that often, about how we provide a similar welcome to individuals, whether they are joining us as staff or faculty or students, or other donors and others. But yeah, Barbara has a question. How do you share and orient new staff and students to the charism? That's sort of where I was going with this. So
Thank you.
Question comes from Barbara McCarab from the USCCB.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us, Barbara. I appreciate that. That is something that has really matured, I would say, out of the CSJ Institute and under Shannon's leadership. And so at all of our new staff orientations, at our faculty orientations, at our opening convocations for students, at our student orientation, the CSJ Institute, working with the faculty, working with the provost office, working with HR, working with student affairs, depending on the constituency, they have actually put together beautiful orientations for our board as well, and actually have gone beyond that and do board training and faculty development for the other sponsored schools of the Sisters of St. Joseph in our LA province. And we have 4 different schools that are part of that our family, 3 that are actually sponsored. And so we provide programs, and we've created, I say very, very generously, I didn't, Shannon and her team have created documents and materials to really help in those orientations. But I think probably the most important piece of the orientation is, you can provide all the information you want, but if you don't provide the heart of the story, and it really is the story, the history of the Sisters of St. Joseph that grabs the attention of people coming in. I will also say I interview all faculty, for the most part, whenever I can, most faculty who come into the university and many of the administrative positions. And part of my conversation is always about the history of the sisters and the charism, because you have to know if this is going to be the right fit for you. And for most people who come, they're like, yes, this is why I want to be here. So it's a really important part of our ongoing conversations, but I really want to credit Shannon, who's on screen here, for her leadership in that.
Thanks, Anne. Several others have asked sort of how do we gain access to the oral history? And Shannon has put in the chat, you can search on YouTube for CSJ Institute. I'm curious, you shared that you used those oral histories in your class with students. What do you find really resonates with students, or what are they surprised about from, some of those oral histories or about the Sisters of St. Joseph?
It's actually wonderful. They're very surprised. First of all, they're really surprised by how cool the sisters are. I just have to say that. And when we have sisters come into class, they're like, wow, because these are real people. And interestingly now, and these are traditional undergraduates, so they come in their first year. So they're young. And many of them have never met a sister in their life. And so that, which is, and many of them don't even have a stereotypical view of what a sister is, as probably people more my age and younger, but adults might. And so what I find so interesting is their openness, first of all, but they just are like sponges. It is fascinating to me that they will, across the semester, and my co-teacher Elizabeth Sturgeon, I think, is here on the screen also, across the semester, they will reference sisters they saw in a video as though these are their good friends. These are their mentors. They will say, as Sister Constance, now Sister Constance died several years ago at age 105, I think. They will say, as Sister Constance says, or, as Sister Annette Bowers was talking about in STEM, and I'm so moved by how impactful the words and the example and the encouragement they feel, and also the how moving the history is. So recently we had our students watch one of the videos on Vatican II. Now, 18-year-olds, let me tell you about Vatican II. It's not that compelling to them necessarily. It doesn't connect to much in their life. Now it might because we have a new pope, but at the time, it didn't say much to them. They watched the video and they wrote reflections about what Second Vatican Council did, why it was formed, because they heard it from the sisters. And then they heard it connected to the sisters' experience of what it means not to wear a habit anymore, and how that allowed sisters in many cases to access places and be able to do the work more effectively because they weren't standing out apart. It was how that was a struggle within orders for people to come to some consensus. Those stories connect. because these are things that they think about. What are the struggles that they have? How do they do their work? So I think it's those personal stories that changes their relationship to Mount St. Mary's, quite honestly, because they have access to something incredibly personal, and they feel this incredible love that just pops across the video.
That's great. Those videos are very powerful, and no doubt that they will continue to inspire students for many years to come as well. And not just students too. I've watched several of them, and they're inspiring videos. Attendees, please feel free to put more questions into the chat. I'll share another question that I have. I know you shared that the pilgrimage to Le Puy was life-changing, and I've had that experience as well and feel very fortunate, but many cannot travel to Le Puy, France. Do you have suggestions about how, members of this audience or others could find out more about the founding of the sisters and the charism that you felt in Le Puy, France?
Yeah. Yes, because it's not possible, and it's not possible for all of our faculty, staff, and students. As we look at the numbers, we go every year, but it's still a small proportion in proportion to our full community. So one of the things that we have done is really pulling together different videos, materials to bring this to life. And we continue to think about, with AI, how we might do that in a more experiential way, a more immediately impactful way for folks. But I would encourage, if you're interested, the videos that we have on the history, and we have a wonderful video, the year we bought the house, Mother St. John Fontain's house, and the story connected. I mean, it's an amazing story of how it all just happened. And it brings it to life and why that mattered. And then you see the house, you get to go through it in the video, and so there are ways to do it that way. I also, I think that one of the things that we're talking about at the Mount, and I know other institutions have done this, and perhaps we would have much to teach us, is how do we access some of these spaces in the United States too? I mean, we are really starting to pay more attention to the Trek. I know several members of the Mount community, including Shannon, has been on the Trek. We have a beautiful book one of our alums, along with others, have written on the Trek. And so we're really trying to think, there are things that are more accessible and less expensive, quite honestly, because going to France is not easy to do financially for many, many people. And for our institutions, we're all limited in how much we can do in terms of sending our folks. So it is a limited number of people that can go from Mount St. Mary's in a year, for example. But we do have materials, and I think that, and then again, thinking about how do we do that in terms of thinking about our domestic spaces. Going to St. Louis would be fabulous for us, and seeing the origin. We'd love to bring students there, and that might be more doable. So there may be some things we could think as an association we might do together to really leverage our own histories and how these spaces where our institutions were founded matter. They were there, they're all in certain places for specific reasons. So I'd love for us to explore that as an association. I think we have much to learn from each other there.
That's great. And if I'm correct, that there is a video too of the house in Le Puy, and sort of a pilgrimage experience. We've highlighted it with ACSSJ before as well.
Yes, you can have the pilgrimage experience virtually, and it's quite beautifully done. It's quite beautifully done. It's different, of course, but it's quite beautifully done. Yeah, so I would encourage people, just to explore, have some fun with these these incredible stories that our sisters and others in France, the sisters in France are in those. It was there's amazing footage that brings so many members of the family of St. Joseph together, and we've been able to archive those and make them available. The power of film, I can't overstate. If anyone is interested in this similar kind of project at your universities, I know our film department and Shannon would be very happy to give you some counsel on what they've learned through this. But I can't overstate the importance of that particular project. Also because some of our sisters, I said, many of them are not with us now or are no longer in the position of health where they could do these longer interviews. So those stories are critical. So I would encourage other universities, particularly with film programs, to think about doing something like that.
Yeah, it's such a gift. There's, as sisters, are unable to, have the filmings, what's on camera just lives on for so long. And we're grateful for the CSJ's work on providing those videos, not only for Mount St. Mary's to use, but for everybody to use. Yeah, and I see some interest of, other campuses, Avila taking international students to the Mother House in St. Louis, and, other sisters exchanges and family visits to each other places could happen, which would be exciting. You talked a lot about the world needs the love and charism now more than ever. Can you just talk a little bit more about that and how, this week, today, the threat on higher education and our institutions is, substantial, and how are you leaning into that on a daily basis now, the change that's happening in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah. So this is a question I anticipated and I thought I'd have the least formed answer for in many ways. But I can tell you how I am looking at this, how our board is, how we are. There's not one answer on this. I think the answer is you have to do this through the lens of love and care for our students. That our primary responsibility is the sacred trust our students put in us. And so for Mount St. Mary's, being predominantly Pell students, we're about 68% of our traditional undergraduate population are Pell students, 65% first in their family to go to college. This opportunity is an enormous sacrifice for families. And for our students, it is a path forward that is not just for themselves, but for their entire family and in fact, community. So we take that trust so seriously, and our absolute responsibility is to protect our students and their ability to have this education. And so that's informed some of the ways that Mount St. Mary's has responded to these orders. We have taken one strategy. Other institutions, and rightly so, have taken other strategies, have gone with other strategies. Because we're all trying to do that. And I said in my talk that, that difficult situations are not always difficult to the response to difficult situations are not always difficult to discern, because love guides us. I have to tell you, this situation is the most difficult situation I have ever experienced in terms of discerning what is the right thing to do. I have this tendency to want to speak up. And I tell students, you need to stand up against injustice. You need to speak up. And I want to do that. And then I hear this voice saying, at what expense? Is that self-indulgence, or are you protecting your students by speaking up? These are hard questions we have. These are very hard questions. And so I think that all of us have to really look at our students and think, how do we care for them and ensure as best we can the viability of this institution that is changing lives through the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph. This is a different educational experience than if our students went to the community college or the CSUs or the UCs. And I believe that they benefit from this education in a way that their entire life moves into a different trajectory. It's not just the degree, it's the formation they get while earning that degree, the support they get. So I think these are really hard decisions. So at Mount St. Mary's, we are quite honestly kind of going, which I have also learned from the sisters. Sometimes it's best to go under the radar and do the work. And so I have to control my urge to throw a letter out there or to get out there on my soapbox. And I think about my days post-presidency, when I can do that if I want. And I will. But right now I have an ultimate responsibility to these students and the dreams that they put in our hands. And so right now we're under the radar. Other institutions may have very different response. And it also depends where you live, what your situation is politically, who your students are. But I think as we continue, and we won't get this perfect, I know, but if we put our students first and the safety of our faculty and staff, particularly our staff, in a city of so many immigrants that is Los Angeles, we won't make big mistakes. We will do our best in the care of those in our community. And so that's our guiding focus right now. It's hard. At the same time, by the way, through our associations, we are fighting. We are talking to our representatives in Sacramento, for us in California, in DC. You don't stop working on these issues and making sure people understand the needs of higher ed. That is critical. We all have a role in that. And so our associations like ACCU, our associations like NICU, our associations like ACE, those are critical lobbyists who are working on our behalf, and we better be with them and give them the stories they need to convince legislators of what students need and what is in the best interest of the students of this country. And so that's our responsibility too. So it's a both and.
Thanks, Anne. It is a both and I think you show here today how you've embraced that and carefully balance all these different complex dynamics of change in the world, but also coming back consistently to the charism of the Sisters of St. Joseph, and that, as you said in your talk, love becomes the leadership strategy, and you exude that here, and you've shown us that. So thank you. And thank you for everybody for being here today. It's great to have everybody join on this session and hear a little bit more about the gift of the charism. And I think, Anne, your talk really is a good segue into our next session that I know you'll be moderating. But the next session happens in just 30 minutes, leading with love. So we'll again pick up on that theme of love and leadership with President Mary Dana Hinton from Hollins University. And you'll be back to moderate. The Zoom link is in the chat, and I hope you all will join us in 30 minutes. Thank you again. Please join me in giving President Anne McElaney-Johnson a round of applause for a great presentation and your words and thoughts today. You've given us a lot to think about, so thank you again. And we'll see everybody here in 30 more minutes, back here again. Thank you.
Thank you.